We're in the early stages of our fourth full century of Shakespeare being heavily popular in the media that is consumed by people across the world. With all of this time, people have adapted the base work in so many different mediums. Some of these adaptations have been wonderfully transformative to how we think about Shakespeare, and some others have not. So, all of these Shakespeare adaptations will continue to receive Hollywood funding and trying new and exciting things with the script as old as time. But how is anyone supposed to pick one from another? Surely, if these film adaptations all seem worthwhile, they might have different uses depending on the audience. This is the question I want to explore today, but I won't be tackling it alone. I want to find out what we can gauge about these uses of adaptations based on the writing done on behalf of each film. Reactions by scholars, critics, and media can all influence the purpose of this adaptation in society. I watched 5 Shakespeare adaptations of Macbeth. I read what people had to say about them. I want to find out what we can learn about how we view and use these adaptations from Shakespeare in our everyday lives. Before delving into film adaptations of Macbeth, I needed to be reminded of the true Shakespeare performance. In order to evaluate a Shakespeare adaptation, you need a baseline of what the true Shakespearean interpretation is. This is especially important for my ideas because we're going to qualify these adaptations for their purposes in education, entertainment, unique and avant-garde film viewing, and the advancement of Shakespeare. In order to talk about our films in these categories, we need to understand their relationship to Shakespeare, because we will surely find the film's relation to the original as a helpful medium for judging its usefulness in certain environments. This was the perfect baseline for me because of how recent and fast-paced the play is. It delivers all lines of the original Shakespeare, and the acting is quite good. This would be the baseline for our analysis today. There was nothing academically written about this performance so far, which is probably to do with the fact that it stayed very true to the original Shakespeare and did not take many risks. This performance is very versatile. It has all the qualities that work for educational purposes of Shakespeare. It's funny, only 2 hours, and will hold the attention of high schoolers at 10 a.m. And Shakespearean scholars combing the performance with a fine-toothed comb.
Enough momentum to knock down all the pins at once. Now that would be cool.
The first film adaptation I watched was the action drama from 2015. Entitled Macbeth, this adaptation was directed by Justin Kurzel and stars Michael Fassbender. This is a quick-cutting, fast, and intensified version of the play by William Shakespeare. While all dialogue is from the original script of Macbeth, it cuts 60% of the play's dialogue. Yes, you heard me right, a 2-hour Macbeth with 40% of the script. Could you tell it was an action movie yet? Diplomatic dialogue is cut almost entirely to get closer to the more intriguing lines, scenes, and killings. It is Macbeth after all. We know we are getting a different version of Shakespeare, which would make some say it isn't Shakespeare at all, but does it do anything more to enhance our experience? Can we make sense in use of this action-y mashup to any of our 4 categories of education, entertainment, avant-garde film viewing, and advancement of Shakespeare? What does our research say? In her scholarly journal entry on the film, Sarah Ward expresses the ideas already mentioned of fast-paced emotional cinema when she writes, "The feature both hews closely to the original tale and tries to create an innately contemporary interpretation of its contents, recognizing that the spirit of the story, and staying true to action and emotion, matters above all else." Action and emotion is clearly recognized as an emphasis in this story, and clearly with Fassbender at the helm, this is surely to check all the boxes in the mainstream entertainment department. But is that all this adaptation is? Another action movie with some Shakespearean language? Sarah Ward disagrees. She states that added battle scenes, images that bring suffering of the prose to the viewer's eyes as well as ears. Here we might have something. The idea of the movie helping to get the prose across is a very helpful one in an educational setting. When teaching Shakespeare in the high school classroom, it can sometimes be very difficult for students to get emotion out of words that they are unfamiliar with. This intense action and emotion-based movie might be a useful tool for students who aren't fluently able to read Shakespeare and get the meanings from it. Agnieszka Erasmus shares this idea of this point when she states, "Children provide it with a visual frame and become the driving force for the protagonist's actions." Here, Erasmus is acknowledging the idea that in a typical reading of Shakespeare, it can be hard to imagine and understand the intense emotions of the play because it is hard to imagine all of the violence around children. For educational purposes, this is even more support to help high schoolers visualize the intensity of these situations in the play. Elise Walker elicits the same idea when she states, "Children suffer in palpable ways." Palpable is the key word in this sentence, as it shows that this information can be digested by audience better because of its visualization. So, we have established a solid foundation for the place of this adaptation in the classroom and on the big screen. Does it check any of our other boxes? I surely wouldn't consider it unique or avant-garde, and I think that this quote from Tricia Yulden on the film sums up whether this film advances Shakespeare. She states the fiery death inflicted upon Macduff and her wee barons is grisly but serves to inform the most powerful scene in the film, in which Macduff is apprised of the unspeakable act. Like Kurzel's overall direction, Fassbender's labored rendition of Macbeth's final soliloquy fails to realize the sense of the piece. So, it seems as though cutting 60% of Shakespeare's original script won't help when qualifying your being an advancement of Shakespeare. I think we have found a safe place film as an adaptation, serving to educate students on Shakespeare and entertain a modern audience. Joe Macbeth is a 50s noir gang film clearly inspired by the success of Elia Kazan's On the Waterfront a year earlier. The shots are smooth, the action is fun, the lighting is dim, and the language isn't Shakespeare. The plot is certainly inspired almost scene by scene. There are some additives though, and the noir genre can make it hard to tell which secondary and tertiary characters are which in comparison to the Macbeth world. The 50s-style gangster talk for the dialogue only has a few inspired lines from Shakespeare. Reviews by bloggers and scholarly journals echoed some of my main concerns, but also had some praises. Robert F. Wilson writes, "Since the directors remained true to the plot and themes of Macbeth while fashioning realistic, contemporary, and filmic spaces in which the action can take place, the result is inscription of the play in the formulaic genre of gangster films." While it has its moments, there was a lot of head-scratching scenes that felt corny even for the 1950s. The movie did not give enough Shakespeare to be seen considerably at all as a form of education. To be considered for the initiation of Shakespeare, everything must be clear and recognizable, in which Joe Macbeth fails in almost every way. Without any of its language, this film adaptation also fails in the category of advancing Shakespeare. Without hardly any influence in language, which was arguably Shakespeare's biggest contribution to the world, it is impossible to say that this film would have any transformative effects on the genre of Shakespeare. But could this gangster noir not entertain? It didn't for me or my roommates who watched it. I would have much preferred to switch the channel, which would not bode well for a box office entertainment film. That's just my opinion though. Bloggers and reviewers like William Showell felt the same, stating, "Joe Macbeth is an obvious updating and vulgarization of Shakespeare's tragedy Macbeth, but even on its own in terms, it just doesn't work. A disappointment as a gangster movie, lacking the tension, suspense, and excitement that the genre requires. As others have noted, you keep waiting for the Shakespearean moments instead of being gripped by the story." So it seems as though this adaptation is taken as a failed gangster movie, which eliminates our last category of entertainment. The only thing that this story has on its side is the noir genre, which is adored by many as a niche category of old films. Without enough Shakespeare and good filmmaking, it seems as though adaptations like this will only fall into the hands of noir enthusiasts and curious Shakespeareans. In both cases, the audience might come out disappointed. This 1950s feudal Japanese interpretation of Macbeth by Akira Kurosawa has garnered much attention throughout history for its unique transportation of William Shakespeare to such a different time and place. Despite its slow pace, it's a fun watch with lots of interesting details and mise-en-scène that keep you interested. While most Shakespearean language and some plot elements are missing or added, this adaptation still feels like Macbeth. It speaks volumes to Kurosawa's filmmaking that such a far reach from the original setting of the play can still make sense. Many aspects of the film have been praised for even improving elements of Shakespeare's original play. Research on this movie is abundant, and much media has been made about it specifically, so I won't spend time summing up everything that's out there. While researching, however, it was easy to see how revered this film is for the contributions it has made to film and Shakespeare. In her essay while discussing the adaptation of Witches, Laura Zambrano states, "To believe and follow them is a sin in itself, implying a turning from God to Satan. Their prophecy serves to tantalize Macbeth until, yielding to the temptation, Macbeth believes the prophecy and murders his king, thereby upsetting the natural order. Macbeth's betrayal is as much a blow against God as it is against any society, and the man-eating horses and storms that spring up are nature's acknowledgement that Macbeth has killed the king, God's representative on earth, and has consciously committed himself to evil." This quote outlines how Kurosawa's adaptation was able to elevate ideas of religion, good and evil, and nature. With this feudal Japanese setting, Christian ideas from the original Shakespeare play are interpreted through Japanese myth, creating a whole new dynamic for Macbeth itself. When categorizing this adaptation, I would be hard-pressed not to make an argument for all but one of these categories. The film is clearly entertaining, and it is still critically acclaimed today. It also has a niche following for classic movies, feudal Japan, and samurai movies. The amount of research and Shakespearean acclaim firmly cements this adaptation as something that helps dynamize and develop new perspectives for the original story of Macbeth. The only place this adaptation finds itself lacking is in the purpose of education. For a film class, this movie could easily pass, but as for educating students on Shakespeare, instructors may be adding to confusion rather than solving it by showing this adaptation.
Pins at once.
Scotland, PA is a 2001 adaptation of Macbeth set in 1975 in small-town Pennsylvania. Instead of the Kingdom of Scotland, our comedic drama of Macbeth is tasked with taking over a small-town restaurant. This early 2000s dark adventure, despite its dropping of Shakespearean language and time traveling to such a different setting, still feels like Macbeth. Plot elements are almost all there, and the action keeps up well with the original script. Elizabeth Deachman calls this thriller white trash Shakespeare, and I wholeheartedly agree with that description. The main argument of her essay is to observe this movie through an analytical lens involving class, where modern class conventions are applied, compared, and contrasted with this movie. This perspective is one of many meaningful reflections on this transformative adaptation. Now the big question is, what purpose does this adaptation fit under? This film cannot be discounted as an educational film because of the way the humor and drama is able to captivate audiences, which would be helpful in garnering the attention of Shakespearean students. Obviously, this movie would have to be combined with a more traditional form of Macbeth in order to understand Shakespeare's intent. The movie is certainly entertaining and has carved out its niche as a film. The biggest question is, does this film advance Shakespeare? I certainly believe it does because of the way this movie blends in so well with its early 2000s counterparts, but it also stands out as so innately Shakespearean. Maybe I'm wrong though. Maybe all these adaptations can work for any purpose. Maybe they work for none unless it's pure Shakespeare. Much more thoughtful and analytical approaches have been done for adaptation, but I hope this thought experiment ended with some insightful points for you. If you have any other opinions or ideas about any of these movies, let me know in the comments below. And thank you so much for watching.